Oh, I'm not really sick enough. I don't look sick. I'm not worthy of help because I'm not sick enough. I was fat before, I'm still fat. You're taking an ED person's most private, most sick thought, and you're just mirroring them and shoving them in their face. I don't think there are many teenagers who would have an appointment like that and not use every one of those words as lifelong ammo against themselves in their war of self-destruction. You can go from affirming what they need to hear and saving someone from this life, or you can do the absolute opposite and you can push them off the cliff, and that is, I'm afraid, what you are doing. So hello, you wonderful citizen of the internet, and welcome to another eating disorder related video. Today I wanted to have a bit of a chat about some of the really harmful and completely incorrect preconceptions people have about eating disorders, and the fact that this stuff that is really harmful can often come at you from the people in your life who are the most important, be it like a family member, a loved one, or it can come at you from the people who are actually supposed to be the most knowledgeable and who are supposed to be the ones saving your life, whether it's a doctor, whether it's a psychiatrist. They can be the ones who are spitting this nonsense. So I wanted to talk about that, and I wanted to talk about what you can do if that is the case. And finally, I wanted to talk about the fact that, honestly, you kind of have to do something about it. Because even if this person who is saying this stuff to you, even if it's like a one-off appointment, it's like an assessment or something, or it's a family member you don't see often, and you think, nah, I'll just let it slide, and it won't come back and bite me. I've had some really huge realizations recently regarding this that you only see when you get to be my age. You see that there are some things you can't let slide because they will cycle back in some kind of way, and they will affect you in some worse way down the road if you don't do something about it. So I kind of wanted to have a bit of a chat about all of that, really. And I got thinking about all of this because I saw on my Snapchat memories the other day that it was 3 years ago now, when my ED was fully relapsed, that I had this god-awful run-in with a psychiatrist who completely blew my mind in terms of how uneducated she was about EDs and how dangerously she was playing it with her ED clients, and the stuff she was saying to them that was so triggering, and she had no idea it was triggering, the stuff she was saying. And the thing is, I've always been very sheltered about this when it comes to medical professionals being awful about EDs. Like, I knew that there were members of the public who had these awful beliefs about EDs, that you can only have an ED if it's visible, if you're not absolutely emaciated you must be faking it, or you must be doing it, just saying it for attention, all these awful things. I knew those beliefs were out there, but I didn't know they were so prevalent in the medical community because, for most of my life, I was underweight. I was born underweight. I was underweight for most of my life. So when I was ED'd, I was very underweight, which meant that I had, I don't really know what to call it, but almost like this sort of ED'd privilege of sort of medical professionals taking you at your word and assuming you're legitimate because you're skinny. And I hadn't realised just how awful dealing with doctors is for people with EDs who are at higher weights. Although I'd heard people tell the stories about it, I thought, oh, that must be quite a rare thing. That must be just, the occasional GP, probably, not like a psychiatrist who's going to be that uneducated. And then I met this psychiatrist in 2021, and it was eye-opening, to say the least. She wasn't going to be my psychiatrist. I only saw her the once because I was there for an assessment. I mean, the typical state of mental health care at the moment, I'd had to wait a whole year for therapy, and I thought I was going to get therapy at the end of this year. No, after a year, I got an assessment to see what kind of therapy they were going to give me. And after that, I would have to wait another year before the therapy actually came through. So you have to wait a year just to get on the right waiting list. That's how mental it is. So she was like my assessment person. So she was just going through like my medical history and like, okay, so which bits of your colossal mental health history are current and all of that. And when she got to the ED bit, and I was like, well, yeah, that is kind of current, like things are going on at the moment. This was the first time that I've had those ungodly words spoken directly to my face, coming out of the mouth of a consultant psychiatrist, no less, not an ED specialist, but a consultant psychiatrist. And she just looks at me and she goes, "You don't look like you've got an eating disorder to me. You look fine to me." And she was like a very brisk, blunt sort of person. So it was like, well, you look fine to me. And I was just mind blown, and I pointed out, I was trying to have the conversation with her about, you can't, EDs are not visible illnesses, blah, 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 blah. And she just wanted to get the thing done. She didn't want to listen to me. She just wanted to get the thing done. So I was like, well, I have lost X amount of weight in X amount of weeks. And it was quite a dramatic amount of weight. And then she looks at me and she goes, well, you must have been overweight before then. Like it was a good thing that I dropped all this weight in this incredibly short amount of time. And, and that was another thing that you don't say to an ED person, even if you're thinking it, because you are suggesting that it's a good thing, that they needed to lose that weight, that they should be doing it, that maybe they should even continue with what they're doing because it's a good thing. That's what you're suggesting to them when you say this. And I had to correct her and say, I wasn't even overweight. Like I'm pretty tall. Like from the middle of the healthy weight zone to where I am now, that is the amount of weight. Like, do you not know these things? And I guess not. I guess I was like projecting anorexia mathematical superpowers onto a normal person in expecting her to be able to do the BMI calculations like that. But so this whole appointment goes on. I am trying to, I am vocalizing that I am. You don't say these things to an ED person. Like, what the hell? Like, and she just swept on. She just wanted to keep it going and get the assessment over. And by the end of this assessment, I was just thinking, I am so glad that this happened to me now in my mid-30s rather than when I was a teenager. Because I don't think there are many teenagers in the opening stages of their ED who are, they're not confident in themselves yet. They maybe don't have a diagnosis yet, so the I'm not sick enough thing is weighing very heavily on them. I don't think there are many teenagers who would have an appointment like that and not use every one of those words as lifelong ammo against themselves in their war of self-destruction. Like, that's what you're doing. You are just presenting them with so much ammo against themselves. Because you're taking an ED person's most private, most sick thoughts that, I'm not really sick enough. I don't look sick. I'm not worthy of help because I'm not sick enough. I needed to lose that weight anyway. I need to lose more weight. I was fat before. I'm still fat. I'll never be good enough to even be diagnosed, let alone have help. All of these things, you're taking an ED person's most private, most horrible beliefs, and you are just mirroring them and shoving them in their face. And it's like, you don't do this. So as I say, like, thank God it happened to me when I was in my mid-30s, and I'd been diagnosed with eating disorders for years. So it's like, look, and also by my age, you're quite settled in who you are and in what you're doing to yourself. And even if you're doing self-destructive things to yourself, it takes a lot more than that, I think, to really sway or impact someone my age. We've got less neuroplasticity, we're less bendy in the head. Whereas you do that to a teenager. So I went home and I immediately wrote a big angry letter, which is always my MO when it comes to any kind of mental health treatment that is bad. Because as I say, I tried to say it in the moment. I started writing letters to mental health people because I wasn't able to say things in the moment. I just wasn't confident enough and I didn't feel like I could. So I would write them a letter after the fact afterwards. These days I am confident enough to say it in the moment, but as I experienced, they don't listen. And this is quite common. It doesn't matter how good you are with words, how many statistics you can throw at them, all of this stuff doesn't matter. If you're trying to say it in the moment, it's probably going to be ineffectual because you're talking to an authority figure and they're used to being in the big chair. They're used to being the one who knows what they're talking about. You are there as the lesser. You are there as the one who is there to learn or to be educated or to just be in the smaller chair. And if you start telling them their job, most people in that position, as I say, authority figure, it will get their back up and they will just reject what you're saying. And even if they act like they're listening, they're probably not really. With a few exceptions, people who are humble enough to actually listen. But if you write them a letter and you get them in private, in the quiet of their own office or their own home, and you get, they can't interrupt you. They can't immediately bark back and interrupt you in a letter. They've got to hear you out and everything you want to say. If you need time to research or to get your words right or to get the metaphors right or whatever, you can say all of it perfectly, phrase it all perfectly, and they can take days to chew it over if they need to. And I just find it's much more effective. I've done this for myself. I've done this for friends who've had issues with their doctors and things. I've written them letters and sometimes they've had to polish it up a little bit because I get a bit too ranty and they're like, I can't say those things to my doctor because I'm not insane like you. But yeah, so letters are quite good. And actually, I did get phoned back by the mental health body, and I think I actually had a phone call with the psychiatrist herself, and she did seem quite abashed and quite taken aback at the things that she hadn't realized she was saying and doing with these words, because my main point was that, this is head fucky for me, but for me, this is like, at my age, this is just a level of talk about it down the pub, it's ridiculous kind of head fucky. But if you're doing this to me, you're doing it to other people too. You're doing it to teenagers who are in the budding stages of an ED, who everything that you say makes the hugest difference to. And you can go from, affirming what they need to hear and nipping their ED in the bud and really being helpful and really making a change and saving someone from this life. Or you can do the absolute opposite and you can push them off the cliff. And that is, I'm afraid, what you are doing, probably to teenagers. If you're saying it to me, you're saying it to them. And that is what horrifies me. And it seemed like it kind of horrified her too a bit when she realised. And I hope she wasn't just saying that. Like, I hope it genuinely did make a difference. It's quite upsetting. It is quite upsetting, just the thought of, your younger self or someone like you. Because, I did have a psychiatrist who was far from ideal when I was 14. And she wasn't as bad as that, but probably only because I was kind of protected by the fact that I was at a low weight. So she wasn't going to say those things to me, but I suspect she said them to any kid who was in my position, but with a few more pounds on them. So, for all of those kids, I feel like when you land in a situation like this with any kind of authority figure, you have got to write them a letter. You've got to complain in some kind of way, phone them up, phone up their hires, whatever you've got to do. You've got to speak up. And I also want to talk about this kind of situation, but when it's in your family, because for a lot of people, that the person in their life who is saying these harmful things, who's having a really harmful effect on them, it's a family member. And of course it is, because, EDs start usually when you're in your teenage years, you're still living at home, you're around your family. So they're there when you're eating, when you're exercising, they're there at all these vulnerable points. Their opinion, matters to you because they're a family member. So they've got a lot of clout with your brain and they're around you all the time. They've got a lot of time to get frustrated with you. They've got a lot of time to say these things. And I do remember, on the ED forum in the early 2000s, when all of us were quite young still, everyone was butting heads with certain family members. And I think while it is an obligatory, I think, part of growing up with an ED to have at least one family member who absolutely doesn't get it and who absolutely puts their feet in their mouth constantly. And usually these people are trying to be helpful, or at the very least they're neutral, and yet they just don't know what they're talking about, so they make it worse and they make it worse. That is a given, because not that many people in the world are very educated about ED. So if you suddenly have an ED, it's pretty much guaranteed that someone in your life is going to be awful about it. And you've just got to hope that, like a lot of my family have over the years, they will educate themselves and they will get a lot better. There is hope for these people. I promise you there is hope for them. But there were the really unlucky people on the ED forum. And there's a lot of unlucky people when it comes to this in the world, whereby their family member who's problematic, it's not an innocent accident. It's either someone who is like a toxic kind of narcissistic type of person, and they're doing it on purpose because it's like this, they feel the attention's been taken off them, or they feel put upon or whatever, and they're just a nasty person. Or you've got the other avenue, which is simply that you've got someone who already has an ED in your life. So you've got like a mum who's got an ED history or whatever, and because of that they're ED'd, and they say ED'd things, or they put their behaviours on you, or they think what they're doing is normal, so they say these things, and it's been toxic your whole life. The almond mom stereotype that is becoming so well known now, and it's tragic, because you see so many comments on TikTok and stuff of people saying, oh God, I wish I had an almond mom. Oh, I'd be so beautiful. I'd be so thin. It'd be so easy if I had an almond mom. And it's like, you don't realize what you're saying, because there is a difference between growing up with parents who are very good about healthy eating and who educate you in that. And, that was kind of my upbringing, was a very healthy eating mum, not in any way ED'd, So, so I did grow up skinny, and I was naturally skinny. I mean, I still ended up with an ED, but that was not in any way the fault of the food stuff in my upbringing. So there's that, but that's not an almond mom. An almond mom is toxic by definition. And no, you're not going to grow up naturally skinny with an almond mom. You're going to grow up miserable and eating disordered because you have grown up in a soup of toxicity. So you might be skinny, you might not be skinny, but you're not going to be happy. You don't want an almond mom. You do not. And the reason I wanted to talk about this part of it all is that I feel like the same thing can be done if you've got this situation, if you've got someone in your life. And obviously, if the person in your life is like a toxic narcissist, writing them a letter, I don't know how much use that's going to be, because those kinds of people just don't listen. But I would try it all the same. But I would just, if you know you're dealing with someone toxic, don't put anything too vulnerable in that letter, because they will use it against you. You know, and do some research on how to get your way with a narcissist, how to phrase things, how to do things, how to, and oftentimes I'm afraid saying less is more, I think, with them. And it's, going to be a long, difficult journey. But if you're dealing with someone who is not being toxic, it's just their own baggage or their own lack of education that you're dealing with, I do think write them a letter. And, I've said this before, but this is my MO now with family members, even family members that I'm very close with. Even if I just have to be like, here's a letter, please take it, please read it, I will do that, because I find it very hard to have personal conversations with them. But also B, the same thing applies to talking to authority figures. People's backs get up when you say it, and when you say it to their face, people get their backs up, people don't listen, it turns into an argument, nothing is achieved, or it's like an outcome that's negative. Whereas you give them a letter and you say everything you need to say, you say it non-confrontationally, and you let them have time to mull it over, and usually it leads to something good in my case, I find. And the real reason I wanted to talk about the family aspect of it, and the fact that you kind of have to do something, you have to say something when it's a family member, there's two reasons really. The first being, you can't avoid it. For yourself, you can't avoid it when it's a family member, like, unless you are planning in the very near future, in a few months tops, you are planning to move away, like across the country, or you're planning to like emancipate yourself from these people completely and be done with them. Unless you're going to do that, they're going to be in your life, and they're going to be in your life probably lifelong. So if they're doing something that is harming you now, that is going to be your future forever. And the longer you leave it, harder it is going to be to stand up to it. You've got to say something, you've got to act. And yes, there will be an uncomfortable interim period, but it's that, or it's your whole life is these comments and these things being said and done to you. But the second and the bigger reason is one that's really quite upsetting. And as I say, that's something that you only learn when you get to be my age. And I could not have conceived of this in a million years when I was younger. It just wouldn't have crossed my mind. But I am seeing it with a lot of my friends, particularly friends from the ED forum, who are now also my age, and they've got kids. And their kids are now approaching the kind of age they were when their ED started. And, your family, your mom, your dad, your grandparents, possibly even your aunts and uncles, all of this, well, they're now your kids' family, which means that if you didn't do anything with the person in your life who was being harmful, if you didn't stand up to your almond mom, or like the person who's got an ED themselves and it spills out and they say awful things to you, if you don't deal with them yourself, it's entirely possible that shit is going to bite down on your kids when they're old enough. When your kids are at a vulnerable age, it's going to cycle back, and it's going to be them, and it's quite upsetting. But it's the same, as having a psychiatrist, as I did, the one that I saw once. And if I just thought, well, look, I'm never going to see her again, it's not my issue, I'm never going to see her again, it's going to cycle back, and it's going to get someone younger, and it's going to get someone vulnerable, and it's going to land on their head. And you realise when you get to be, close to 40, you realise that there is no avoiding almost anything. Not if it's going on in your town, in your family, in your local area, and you run into someone who is deeply problematic. You can't just brush it off. You can't just go, not my issue, not my day, not my monkey, not my circus. You can't do that, because they're just going to keep clattering around until someone does it, until someone says what needs to be said, someone who is in no position to deal with it. And it's going to be really harmful to them. You know, it's much the same as what people say about, you know, male grape culture, and the fact that if you are a man and if your friends are joking about this stuff and you just go, I know that was tasteless, but I'm not going to say anything. I don't feel like it's not my day. Don't feel like it. Well, it's going to become more and more and more normalized to them. It's going to be one day that your friends who think it's fine to joke about this stuff and fine to talk about this stuff because no one's ever stood up to them. What about the day that they're at a party and some girl is passed out drunk and, well, they've been joking about it, they've been talking about it, no one objected. You know, you when you see something going wrong, you have to say something, because it can potentially land on someone very vulnerable otherwise. And you don't realize that. You don't realize that until you get older and you see people who've got kids and all the shit that they didn't deal with in their own youth. It lands on the next generation. It's absolutely fucking horrifying. Absolutely horrifying. Yes, write your letters. You know, if you ever end up, or have a phone call, whatever version of kind of speaking up suits you best. You know, I wish I'd been more free and easy with that when I was a teenager myself, because I did have run-ins with psychiatrists who were very, 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 very bad, and I just felt powerless about it. You know, I didn't know that there were bodies you can complain to. I didn't know that I could, you know, that even though I was too shy to speak up at the time, well, I could still write them a letter. I didn't know these things, and it didn't occur to me. So I just, you know, internalized everything and just got worse and worse and worse, and thought, well, therapy's useless, therapists are shit, they're all, you know, they're all terrible, there's no point seeing them. And I think having an attitude that gives you some level of power is very important. So, you know, and obviously these days you've got a lot more power with these things, because so many younger people to a degree have some level of platform they can speak out on, or even if you don't have a platform, you can say these things and it can just go viral, and suddenly you do have a platform that you're talking about things that matter on. You know, and also there's so much social media that gives people the words. People are openly discussing mental health issues, and Generation Z and Generation Alpha are so much more switched on and empowered when it comes to advocating for themselves regarding these things, which is wonderful to see. But also, you know, you've got a phone that records, and you know, you can switch that on around toxic people, and you can literally catch them being toxic, play it directly back to them, and that can be quite a useful tool too. Obviously, you might want to check whether it's legal in your area to record whatever you're going to be recording, but there's so many more tools at your disposal. Another good thing, I think, is it called the Goblin tools? I'll try and find this and link it below, but someone has created this like Goblin toolbox. I think it's basically designed for autistic people, and you write down everything you want to say in a letter and you can pop it into the Goblin thing, and it will change your tone for you. It's like this kind of AI tone switcher thing. So if you want to sound more formal, if you want to sound less formal, if you want to, I think there's like a de-waffle button, which, dude, I need that on my mouth. That if you're too lengthy, like, it will cut out your main points and it will say them succinctly without waffling on, which I haven't used this yet, but I really should. I should use it for every single comment I post, because I am incapable of posting a comment that is not an essay anywhere, and it's terrible. So this Goblin toolbox might also be a very useful thing if you are trying to write a letter to anyone to complain, and you just want it to sound more friendly, less friendly, like whatever it is. There's like a lot of things that can help you around these days. But final thing before I shut up, is just to say, if you do land in this kind of situation, whether it's with a toxic family member, you know, who does the old classic, you know, where when you see them and you don't see them too often, so you see them and they do the, you know, the like the rib gropey hug that's mentioned in Maya Hornbacker's Wasted book. I can't remember if it was because of reading her book that I noticed who did this, or whether I'd noticed it already, but you do get certain relatives who you know, that they feel how skinny or how fat you are, and then they just comment on it, and it's like, oh God. So whether you've got someone like that in your life, or whether you've seen a doctor or a psychiatrist or whatever, and they've done the old, you've got an eating disorder, are you for real? You don't look like it, you look fine to me. Just, you know, like I got 3 years ago. If you're getting any of that stuff, just please know that you are dealing with an absolute arse talker extraordinaire. You know, hopefully if you're on this video, hopefully you know by now that these things are bullshit. ED'd people looking ED'd. Well, there's two flip sides to how incorrect that is. That even if you look at someone and you think, my God, there's an ED'd person, there's a very, very ED'd person over there, you might not be looking at an ED'd person. There are a number of other conditions that will make someone look like that. And as for thinking, oh, you can only be ED'd when you're that way, well, no, that's absolute bollocks. You know, ED'd behaviours, not always do they make you lose weight. Sometimes they make you gain weight. Also, everyone is on a journey of fluctuation. Even if you've got someone who has looked, you know, ED'd at some point in their life and has been dangerously thin at some point in their life, well, everyone, you know, people attempt recovery, people get forced into recovery, people try different medications that make their weight fluctuate, people spill over into different behaviours and their weight fluctuates. You know, you can fall into addictions and alcoholism and stuff like that makes your weight fluctuate. Everyone is on a journey with their weight. So it's very, 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 very rare to find an ED'd person who sinks to a low weight and just stays there without fluctuating at all, you know, their whole life. You don't really see that. I mean, it happens now and then, but it's very, very, very rare. Of all the people I've known with EDs, a lot of them fluctuate, you know, particularly now that we're older, you know, and our metabolism is slowing down and everything. You know, I would say that the vast majority of us, even the ones still actively ED'd, you would not probably look at and go, wow, they've had like a 25-year ED history. You wouldn't know it. Even with that length and that severity and all the complications that people have now, you can't look at it and see them. So anyone who is saying this stuff, they don't know what they're talking about, and therefore you should not put any credence into their words, and you certainly shouldn't internalize those words and use them to whip yourself the way you do when you're a teenager. You know, you do. And I remember this because I've still got like my drawings and stuff that I did when I was a teenager, and my scribbly little bits of writing, and I've got so many drawings that, you know, will be like, it's quite cliched, but like, you know, some sort of miserable hunched figure in the middle with all these like black words like circling around, and it's all these sentences that people have said. You internalize these things and you say them. And the stupid thing is that some of these things, later in my life, I would say them back to the person who said them to me. I'd be like, well, you said this. The people who, you're taking their words and you're like bottling them and you're turning them into this self-flagellation device. Those people do not even remember saying those things. It was such a offhand, you know, spur of the moment, like they were just a bit pissed off and it came out and it meant nothing, and they don't even remember saying it. I almost promise you, the things that you are using to whip yourself with, it was such a random, offhand, kind of flippant comment. It meant nothing, to the point that the people who say it don't even remember it, and you will use it as a weapon against yourself for decades potentially. And it's such a weird world, isn't it, that kind of stuff. But yeah, you know, when someone doesn't know what they're talking about, like it would be really silly to take those words and to really use them against yourself, I would say. If you want to do anything with those words, as I say, take them, stick them in a letter and tell them how dangerous these words are, both to you and to everyone else who goes through their practice or through their school or through your house or whoever it is you're dealing with, you know. Yeah, and with all of that said, I think that was everything I had to waffle about. So if there's anything else ED related you would like me to waffle about, please drop it below or hit me up on Instagram, and I will do my best. And I will leave my ED related playlist below. But obviously, if this is, you know, sucking you into a dark place talking about all of this, then please go and watch something else and just distractify and deprogram your mind for a while, debrief. And I will see you soon with something else. So I hope you're not dealing with anyone like this in your life at the moment, particularly not of the, you know, toxic, malignant, narcissist type, because I don't know what you do about that. I don't know if you're born into a family with one of them going on. I feel for you, and I hope things get better, and I hope all the other people in your life are good. I hope you've at least got a good therapist. Yeah, take care of yourself, and I am going to fuck off now. So thank you for listening. Over and out. Bye-bye.